So this just to give us a little bit of, thank you, it gives us a little bit of the taste of the power of understanding the term, even just the terms, not the language, just even the terminology and the links between other words and the semantic range of terms that go further, and that can really inform your Dharma practice. Let's do one more. Let's do the dukkha, because it's such a famous, this word for suffering. How does it match on to the word suffering, and how in the Pali Canon does it go beyond?
Yeah, I think the word dukkha originally in the Buddha's time did have the sense of suffering, felt experience suffering. And in relation to feeling, it still retains this meaning in the Pali text. The meaning of dukkha vedana is painful feeling, in which it's contrasted with sukha vedana, with pleasant feeling, and a dukkha sukha vedana, the neutral feeling that's neither pleasant nor painful. But the Buddha apparently took this word out of its ordinary usage and then gave it a much broader, wider range of meanings, so that in that wider sense, it conveys the idea of that which is, I say, flawed, defective, deficient, imperfect, unsatisfactory, that which is not able to give complete satisfaction. So in that case, even pleasant feeling and neutral feeling, even the peaceful, blissful feeling of the higher meditative absorptions come to be included within the range of dukkha. So in that sense, dukkha becomes like the defining mark of all samsaric existence.
So it starts to encroach on sukha vedana then, in a way, right?
Well, then sukha vedana is incorporated under dukkha in this broad sense.
Yes.
Since even pleasant feeling is not fully satisfactory. Even if pleasant feeling is impermanent, and when it changes, when it passes away, if we're clinging to it, then it will give rise to dukkha vedana, to painful feeling or suffering in the more specific sense.
And then in the so then the cause of dukkha, the cause of this sort of suffering in the broadest possible sense, unsatisfying to include also pleasant feelings, is in the Pali Suttas. Who's the villain? Is it craving, or is it ignorance? Is it both? How do these ideas of what's the cause of suffering, dukkha, come about in the Pali Canon?
Yeah. Well, first, in the formula for the Four Noble Truths, when the Buddha is expounding the Four Noble Truths, when he comes to the second Noble Truth, he always explains the second Noble Truth to be tanha, which is what we translate as craving. And actually, the word tanha itself, one doesn't see the connection between tanha and an English word thirst. It's not so apparent. But there is, well, first, it's more apparent from the Sanskrit, which is trishna.
Yeah.
But there is another Pali variant on tanha, tasina, in which you could see tasina is more clearly connected to Sanskrit trishna and English thirst.
And this demonstrates our point again, right? Because you get a different feel when you say, oh, the word for craving is actually this Pali word or Sanskrit word that has this sort of link with this idea of thirst. And then it's like, oh, now I get what this is talking about.
Yeah.
Nice.
But so in the formula for the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha pinpoints the samudaya, the origin or cause of dukkha, to be craving or tanha. But in the more extended etiology of dukkha, the explanation of its origins, then he traces the chain of conditions back to avidya, to ignorance. And so ignorance is the more fundamental condition or cause. And this has raised a question that I haven't seen answered even in the Pali commentaries. Why in the Four Noble Truths the Buddha makes tanha or craving the origin of dukkha rather than ignorance, avidya. And the way I interpret this to myself, and this doesn't have any kind of official seal of approval from the upper levels of the ecclesiastical hierarchy, is that ignorance is essentially a negation. It's a negation of knowledge, whereas craving is a more positive force, which is more obvious in the workings of our mind. And so if the Buddha were to expound ignorance in his common discourses, to expound ignorance as the origin of dukkha, people would be puzzled and bewildered. What is this ignorance? And it's because it's a negation of knowledge. It's not something that one could see so clearly operating in the mind. But when the Buddha points to tanha, craving, as the origin of dukkha, then it has an immediate psychological resonance. One could see just by looking into one's own mind how it is one's craving for possessions, sense pleasures, power, position, and so forth that brings repeated conflict, frustration, dissatisfaction, dejection, misery. And so it has, I could say, a more, let's say, a powerful pedagogical function to make craving the cause of dukkha rather than ignorance.
Nice. I was really interested in that question. Why is craving pinpointed as the origin? And that's a nice explanation. And it seems to me, just bouncing off that, is that craving is, action orientated. It's active. It's something the mind does.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
It's therefore more related to like karma in a way, because it's an action.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a nice. And so then it begs the question, well, what about aversion? Why is aversion not pinpointed as a cause of suffering?
I think because in the Four Noble Truths, there's actually a deeper dimension that doesn't come through in many of, I would call, the more popular psychological presentations of the Four Noble Truths. And this deeper dimension is dealing with dukkha not just as psychological suffering, but as the unsatisfactory nature of samsara. And here, craving, looked at from this other angle, is that factor, the potent force that comes over from this life, this existence, at the time of death, that sort of steps into the driver's seat and then drives the stream of consciousness into a new existence and brings the re-arising of this collection of the five aggregates that we say constitutes the individual or the person. And so craving is that particular powerful current of psychological electricity that sustains the repeated process of existence from life to life, whereas hatred or aversion doesn't have that function. But hatred is brought in when the Buddha is speaking about the three unwholesome roots which underlie all of the other mental defilements and which underlie the construction of karma.
So craving is special here, and it's special because it has to do with the energy or the sort of the momentum towards rebirth in a way.
Exactly.
The mental momentum towards rebirth.
Yeah.
And I imagine at the time of death, especially.
Yeah. In fact, in the Pali formula for the second noble truth, the Buddha says it is tanha. Then he describes it as pono bhavika. And pono bhavika is an adjective based on bhava, which means existence, and puna, again or repeated. So craving is pono bhavika, which means that which brings about repeated existence, that which brings existence again.